It's disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Good morning, good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets, China Open.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
And welcome to Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg. When U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg brings you crucial data at terminal speed and instant expert analysis. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
Ever since OpenAI rolled out ChatGPT in late 2022, the world has become transfixed with what AI can do. The same is true for investors. Everyone who spoke during the Bloomberg Invest conference had something to say about AI, including NASDAQ CEO Adena Friedman.
We have been leveraging AI within NASDAQ. Verafin has been using it for several years. And there it's really kind of advanced algorithms, self-learning algorithms, getting smarter and smarter and identifying patterns of behavior. And so we're able to learn from them as to how they've been able to integrate that into their product suite and into their product development suite to make it so it's more effective. At NASDAQ, we actually are asking the SEC to approve our first AI-driven order type within NASDAQ. And a big part of that is we have billions and billions of messages that flow through our systems every day. About anywhere from, I would say, 60 to 80 billion messages a day. So we have a big data pool. And what we're trying to do is structure order types that give institutional investors better fill rates. So we have a certain kind of order type called a midpoint extended life order, a little technical, but there's a timer on the order. It actually introduces latency to create a pool of liquidity that's kind of segmented within the market. And what we're trying to do is see what is the optimal timer on that order that maximizes the fill rate at that stock by stock level. And we evaluate about 175 different characteristics of the market to try to identify what is the right timer, each stock by stock, and it updates every 30 seconds.
AI has been having an impact for decades, and this stuff isn't brand new. The applications that you're seeing today have been in the works for quite some time, and in various applications, you've been interacting with essentially language models. You've been interacting with deep learning. You've been interacting with all sorts of AI approaches. So what's really changed is that the awareness has occurred. There have been some recent advances that have been created by scale-ups, creating ever larger models, which have displayed properties and behaviors that are very interesting, unexpected in some cases. I think everyone in the research world, everyone is pretty surprised at the behaviors that are emerging from large language models. That's actually really, really interesting. Some people have claimed it's sentient, and then when they say that, they get into trouble. I certainly don't think that it's sentient. But I could talk a lot about this, but I'll pause. But the one thing that I wanted to, it's almost like a joke. When I was at the AI lab at MIT, back in the 80s, late 80s, the joke was whenever AI, the definition of AI that we used was something that you could not achieve in a computer. So anytime that you actually got a program to do it, and everyone would say, that's not AI, it's just a piece of software. And so that actually, it's not really a joke. When I look at many of these things today, I say, okay, it's really cool, it's unbelievably impressive, it's very useful, but this has just been a progression. You could say that about computers in general.
It's just more software. That's how I would see it.
Just
and
more
we've
software.
been bringing more software into finance for a really long time, and there's been all kinds of breakthroughs, and there's been all kinds of problems. It is statistical pattern matching. It's extremely powerful, and it's interesting, but I do not see AI achieving what some would call the Holy Grail. Everybody wants to know, what's the S&P going to be in 6 months?
Can you tell me?
And I can't,
Okay.
and neither can the AIs. And And at the risk of getting too technical, there's a really profound technical reason why the AIs, I think, are not going to do that, predict the stock market. The successes that we've seen in AI, and they are amazing, they are brilliant, all come from one profound realization, which is if you can take a large number of samples and you can dichotomize it and say, these are pictures of cats and these are not pictures of cats. And it turns out the internet was great for that because people love putting pictures of their cats on the internet and they say, this is my cat.
Yeah.
So now you've got this labeled data set.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone to town on that. You can train up an AI and it can say, you give it a new image it hasn't seen before, and it'll tell you whether there's a cat or not, and then it'll tell you all the variations. It will tell you this cat is 10 years old and it's this breed and it might be sick with this kind of disease. It's just gotten better and better at that. But that is because the concept of a cat is stable in time.
Cats aren't evolving.
Well, they evolve, but very slowly in evolutionary time, not from today to tomorrow. The stock market is notoriously not a stable distribution.
A lot of these bots or autonomous agents in the AI sphere, they're going to need to go get things done in the world, right? People are already using them to sort of say, hey, order my groceries, or maybe build this website and spin up this server. And so they're going to need financial money. They're going to need money to go do things in the world, these AI agents. And so I think that actually in the future, you're probably going to see a lot of crypto transaction happening between AI agents or AI and various businesses around the world, because crypto is kind of the native money of the internet. The internet is global, it's decentralized, every country, everybody in the world can participate in it. And so it wouldn't really make sense to use the dollar or the euro in a truly global context if you want to be country agnostic. So I think AI will use crypto more.
It is clear that we're at the beginning of a mega cycle in spending in AI, and the real beneficiaries obviously are the applications, so your SaaS companies, and infrastructure, so it's cloud and your high performing chip companies. Those stocks right now are extrapolating pretty enormous compounding growth. We wouldn't necessarily chase that, but to your point, what's really striking about where we are right now is AI allows us to talk to computers like ourselves, and the ability to tap into massive compute power, and probably even more importantly, enterprise data and just global data generally is going to be seismic, and the capabilities are just going to be exponential.
Coming up, how are Nuveen, Citigroup, and Ares competing for the next generation of wealth?
What do you like most about your job?
I think the people. I mean, ultimately, we're a people business. A lot of what my job is as CEO of the company is to give those people sort of motivation, to tell them where we're going, to encourage them to come up and do their best work, to encourage them to collaborate. Sometimes you sort of think you're almost a psychologist, as you are a business leader, I think, sometimes.
And so what's your best piece of advice?
I love pitches. I love being sort of leading from the front, if you like, and spending times with teams. I love to see the work that we're doing. When we pitch for a piece of new business, often when we come together. So I guess I try and put myself in the seat of the client. And what's the client going to think when they see this work? Are they going to be excited? Is it going to turn their brand around? How's it going to resonate with their consumers? So as much as possible, I think probably I try and play that role.
Could face bigger challenges.
Britain's next.
It was going to keep rain World Cup.
This is a 3. As the economic picture does.
The OK is getting ready to make a decision.
Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Invest 2023. I'm Shanali Basak. As millennials and Gen Z come of age, they are investing differently than their parents are. Nuveen CIO Sarah Malik, Citi Private Wealth Global Head Ida Liu, and Ares Global Head of Wealth Management Raj Danda spoke on how financial institutions are pursuing the next generation of wealth builders.
Over the next number of years, we're going to see one of the largest wealth transfers from wealth builders to wealth inheritors. Trillions of dollars are going to change hands. This has a lot to do with how financial advisors are thinking about helping people manage their money. Two areas that are important are building bonds early and trust. So our surveys show that wealth inheritors will stick with a financial advisor if they feel like they trust them. And then for financial advisors, it has to do with building bonds early with those wealth inheritors. Our studies also show that if a FA gets to know a wealth inheritor when they're in their teen years, there's about an 85% chance that inheritor will stick with the FA. And if a financial advisor gets to know them as an adult or young adult, that percentage of keeping that FA drops to about half.
The investment solutions that are available today in the private markets have really changed the landscape. You have opportunities to build a core allocation through open-ended strategies. You can be opportunistic through some of the traditional drawdown funds. And all of that actually really helps the next generation have a lasting, durable allocation to the private markets, which wasn't really possible in the prior generations when the lack of alternatives in the private markets led you to focus principally on a stock and bond allocation.
I believe in the future that we're not going to be talking about ESG or impact investing as a separate class. It's not going to be a separate product. It's just going to be part of the core portfolio. Because the conversations that we're having with our investors around the world, particularly pronounced with the women clients and with the next gen clients and millennial clients, is they care deeply about doing good with the investment dollars. And the important fact is that they don't have to give up or compromise on returns to do good.
If somebody says this is generational, are you talking about what? Finance. It means that you're glorifying ignorance. Okay, you can't glorify ignorance with random events, with processes, where to the contrary, you got to glorify experience. So that cult of the youth that we have today, of course, is getting busted in finance, and soon the kids will no longer be interested in crypto. They'll be interested in some vegetarian diets or something else.
One future opportunity that several Bloomberg Invest speakers have agreed on is that women's sports has room to grow, and there's plenty of reason to believe that it will.
I think women's sports overall, huge momentum. We're going to get a huge lift off the Women's World Cup soccer this year. We're going to get a huge lift off the Olympics next year. The USA women's national team is going for their 8th consecutive gold medal there in Paris next year. It will be an all-time record in the history of team sports in the Olympics. And guess what? None of you probably know about it, right? Yeah, we have to market around this. We have to capitalize on it. But I think there's never been a better time to invest in this growth story. We are a sports, media, and entertainment property that is growing.
Sometimes when an offer is given to us, we're just so grateful that an offer is given to us, that even if they give us a bare minimum, we're like, oh, great, someone wants to talk to me kind of mentality, and that needs to change. We need to look at what is given to the men. We need to look at what is the fair price for it and fight for what we're worth, and also ask the question of, is there an equity play? Can I take ownership in it? And I think just a change in that mentality with younger athletes will go a long way.
So I think the next big opportunity is in women's sports, right? Why? Because more and more people, if you see the women's NCAA tournament, you had more people watching that, right? NCAA women's final, the tickets went for more than the men's final, right? So you didn't know that, did you? All right. The haters will say that's because there was only 20,000 seats in the women's, whereas the men had 60,000. But at the end of the day, those seats, people were paying more. And when I look at that, I sort of see that over the next, here's another question, right? And you guys, you'll just prove all my points, hopefully, since I don't know the answers, and I hope you're gonna do it the way I ask. So right now, I think it's like 95% of all sports on TV is when you're watching watching it, it's male sports, right? It's football, basketball. All right. Do you think over the next 5 years that number goes up or down? Right, it's going to go down. It should go down. You're going to have more women's sports. You're going to have different things. So if you believe that, that means you're going to have more media rights for women's sports. And if you have more media rights, then the value of those franchises will go up. So I think today you can get involved in women's soccer. You can get involved in basketball. You can get involved in all these different sports. If you look at kids, they want to see other women play. So you're seeing that there's this tremendous amount of demand, and it'll sooner or later take over from the media rights.
That's all for the best of Bloomberg Invest. You can watch full interviews at Bloomberg.com and on the terminal. I'm Shonali Bassick, and this is Bloomberg.
We've been so used to the fact that every time there's a problem, central banks come and ease. This has been the kind of playbook, throughout my career, before that, after I left. Now we're in a very different environment. Central banks actually have to create a recession, in essence, to get back to price stability. So it's a complete reversal of the modus operandi, in a sense, of central banks as they've known it for the last several decades. So that's why it's not so much that they're getting something wrong. They've now acknowledged that there is this trade-off, these costs to pay, but it's a completely different way of thinking about central banks, and it's a different role. Another way to put it is they have to be unpopular now in order to get inflation back down, where it used to be you could count on them each time to rescue you, to stabilize the system, to bring support. And that has shifted, and I think many people, even in the markets, have not quite understood in my mind how much we are now in a different regime compared to the last 4 decades, effectively.
So it's almost an easing bias in the markets? How would you describe it?
In the U.S., yes. And I think it's this idea, this almost pre-programmed idea, when there is a problem, i.e. potential recession, central banks will come and ease.
There's much oil to be found in the lower 48 at this point, or even in, let's say, Alaska as well, where mostly we know where all the oil is, and there's no more big Permian Basin kind of deposits anywhere?
People have said that over time, and then we've always been surprised. And so the U.S. has been explored more than any other place in the world. I think the industry has a good idea, but technology allows you sometimes to recover things that you haven't been able to before. That's the story of shale. The other one that continues to be a positive story is deepwater Gulf of Mexico, where we'll go out and drill in a mile or more of water depth and then go down several more miles and find large fields. And the Gulf of Mexico is still relatively underexplored compared to the onshore. So I think there's still room for more discoveries.
Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg, your global business authority. In global leadership are on Bloomberg.
We have reformed the whole ecosystem around attracting foreign direct investment.
To get everybody to the table was the most difficult thing. Now we're here. The next is consummation.
The commitment is there. Now what we need to see is the actions.
Nobody covers the top global leaders like Bloomberg Television and Radio. Your global business authority.
It was really going to be my last try at this, you know. It was such an endeavor, and it was so much risk involved, and it was so personal that if I put my name on it, it would have to be really good.
In 1989, a 13-year-old with a denim jacket in Hollywood, California, had an idea. Mike Amiri combined a love of his neighborhood's unique culture with a gift for creative problem solving and a vision for the future of luxury, creating the most explosive new fashion house of the 21st century. Fueled by twin obsessions with craftsmanship and continuous evolution, Amiri has grown his namesake from an assortment of 6 items to a global brand that generates $1/3 billion in annual revenue. And it all started with one idea. How did your parents' professional life inform your professional ambitions?
Both of them immigrated here from Iran. And my dad, did everything from being a waiter to a bartender to like joining the US Army. My mom kind of stayed home, took care of us. But there was never like a moment of like my dad not doing something. He had like a laundry list of jobs and he like did every single thing. And I think that's one thing I kind of pulled from him is the thought that you always have to be doing, like just don't like be idle. My biggest early supporters are really my family and my friends. When you're starting out something and you're dreaming really big, you're gonna need to remove all voices of doubt from around you. Having all these people who just keep encouraging you along the way will make all the difference.
What gave you the confidence to pursue a career in a creative field?
Growing up, you're trying to figure out like what your thing is and like what your like superpower is. I knew certain things that I was good at or more inclined at and things that I was terrible with. But every time it kind of went across something like creatively or where like imagination was involved, I felt like I saw things that like other people couldn't really see that easily.
You had your first swing at creating something in the fashion space when you were 13, augmenting a jacket with the Motley Crue t-shirt.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration to even sit down and try to do that?
Yeah.
And also, how did you figure out the process?
I grew up in Hollywood, and during that time in like the 80s, Sunset Boulevard was like a different place. I would always kind of see the kids out there and the way they dressed, and their jackets were patched up, or they'd be augmenting their own clothing and creating their own aesthetic. So the first thing that I thought of doing was, let me grab a t-shirt, vintage one, Motley Crue, and like make a jacket out of that. And the simple way to do it was just kind of fit it into the seams perfectly into a Levi's trucker jacket, and couldn't sew, so I paid my friend like, $20 to have his mom. Told me his mom sewed, and she sewed it for like $20. That was like the first thing I made.
So you mentioned growing up in Hollywood. When you think about being in LA in that era, in the mid-'80s, what are the sort of most lasting legacies of that experience on your personality and your creative output to this day?
Hollywood was an amazing place because you not only had like music, but you had like culture. So kids were like skateboarding, BMX, graffiti culture was like huge. And I was so young that things didn't really look raw to me. They looked like really beautiful. So I would walk down an alley in Melrose, and although it's like filthy, there'd be so much art by all the graffiti crews, and I would just be in awe of how beautiful the colors were.
You went to Beverly Hills High at a time where everyone from Angelina Jolie to Alchemist was attending. What was the creative energy like in that little microcosm?
Yeah, so there was like a time in my teenage years where my parents like wanted us to move out of Hollywood to kind of just put us in a better surrounding. So they moved into like a small apartment in Beverly Hills just to get us in the zip code. And it was a bit of like a culture shock. But there were a lot of like kind of creatives there and people that were were really ambitious. Lots of people whose parents had done really big things, so they were like really big thinkers as well.
When you get to the end of high school, do you have any sense of what you want to do as a career or where you want to go with your life?
No, like towards the end of like high school, I was maybe bottom of the class, like worst student there. And it was more just because I was like just constantly distracted. You know, I had, still have ADD, and it always kind of kept my brain wandering. I'd always kind of seen it as like, oh, this guy needs extra time on tests or something like that, right? But later in life, I kind of like realized that's like a superpower in a way. It's like you're just ultra creative. Your brain is constantly going, and I eventually learned to embrace that. I do sometimes get creatively blocked when you're required to come up with so many things on such a rigorous schedule. It's natural for you to find yourself in places where you're not inspired. It's important to remember that the best ideas are usually effortless. So when things get blocked, I realize maybe I just need to step back a little bit and then reapproach it when I'm a bit more relaxed.
So you get to the end of senior year and you apply to go to college.
Yeah, so I went to Santa Monica College, and at home I was dabbling in music. I had bought like an MPC and an ASR-10, and I was really into like making beats and making music, composing.
What was the music you were listening to? Because obviously, based on the collection and also a lot of the interviews you've given, there's clearly a deep connection to sort of that 80s, you know, hair metal, LA rock scene.
Yeah.
But if you have an MPC or an ASR-10, I'm imagining you're listening to some hip hop as well.
Yeah, the funniest thing is like the entry into like rap music didn't start until I got to Beverly Hills, because all the kids in Beverly Hills were listening to like Cypress Hill. And I was really being exposed to like that, where everybody in Hollywood was listening to like rock and roll. I really started like diving into there and early Gangstar stuff, and started to get kind of obsessed with like the LA like rap movement. We had, you know, the Far Side and like Hieroglyphics and Dell. There was something about that I really loved, and that storytelling element, you know, to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And then I just love like the creation process, like the sampling and cutting things up, and that was like something I was starting to be obsessed with. So yeah, so I started making music for a bit.
And so you're doing that while you're going to school. Did you have any real sort of sense of purpose or intent with the college part, or was that sort of just to placate your folks?
Yeah, I think like the college thing is like, you do what you think you're supposed to do. And just that seems like a logical thing, you know? But it wasn't like an obsession, and I knew I didn't like find my like thing, you know? I did kind of persevere and stick with that.
You ended up going to UCLA eventually?
Yeah. Ironically, like I was a really good student there. And
what was the switch?
I realized I can work harder than anyone in the class. I realized like I probably couldn't understand things like as well and as fast, but I knew that I could stay up later and study like longer than anybody. And I became really good at just obsessively trying to be like top of the class. From there, I went into law school.
Were you seriously thinking, this is what I want to do with my life?
There was never a flash like I was in the right place.
Okay.
I think like even being within like law school, I never had the feeling like I was in my element, you know? I just kind of like persevered through it, but like I was never at the point where I was like, oh yeah, I'm a fish in water.
Did you end up taking the bar? And
no, by the time I graduated, like I was already like obsessed with fashion.
But before that happens, you get more immersed in music. You end up, through a very strange twist of events, being a pioneer of K-pop and Korean rap music.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
It's pretty weird, right? One of my best friends at the time was Korean, and he was really into music, and he wrote music and he rapped, and English was his second language.
Okay.
So it was really difficult for him to rap in English, but he was still decent. At some point, the thought came to, you know, why don't you try doing this in Korean? So I started to kind of work with him and make the music with him a little bit. Eventually, it found like success in Korea, it was like so new for someone to bring like hip hop or rap in the genre when they were really into like techno. So it was completely kind of out of left field, but the timing was like really good where it was very, very fresh. So it kind of gave me the opportunity to make music with him, produce music, write music, sometimes perform music.
So after 5 years of, you know, pretty robust success, you decide to pivot and come back to the States. What inspired that decision?
I think at the end of the day, it's like when you're making music in a different country, and especially like within the Korean music industry, it's like a whole set of rules, and you can't really control any of those variables. And there was something about me not being able to kind of understand that industry and participate in there that just wasn't really fulfilling. Knowing when to pivot is really important. For me, the best ideas usually come from somewhere organic and natural. So when I move along, sometimes I have to ask myself, is this the original organic motivation, or am I chasing something? And the second I feel that I'm chasing and not moving naturally, I step back and I pivot.
Lots happening on Wall Street.
There are so many factors at play today.
It remains tight in certain parts of the economy.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insight.
Crisis is too strong a word, and words like that get used a lot.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
America's economy needs a diversity of institutions. That's something that Wall Street pays a lot of attention to.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week, live Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Okay, so you're moving in on me, quick, distracting me with your fancy hands. I'm going to deal with your knight because it's really bothering me.
Ah, my knights.
Yeah, he's a troublemaker.
Yeah.
What did you get up to this weekend?
You know, just robot stuff. A lot of chess. I was practicing for you. I know you're pretty good. Ooh, I don't like that. I will take this, put it over here.
Not cool. Not cool. All right, I will concede. I can see. Got me beat.
Very good game. Well played.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Politics to the world of business. Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, hosts Anne-Marie Hordern and Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters. Get the latest from and about politics' biggest power players at the end of every trading day. Balance of Power, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority. News breaks. No one covers the world like Bloomberg.
The image of Vladimir Putin as the all-powerful leader has been rattled already.
History was made here at the federal courthouse in Miami when Donald Trump became the first ever former president to ever be arraigned on federal charges.
We're going to need a new engine technology, and that's where the real battle lies. And whoever makes that decision first is going to have a huge impact on this industry.
Bloomberg, your global business authority. Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg?
That is a great question.
It's a great question.
Great question. Great question. Best question I get all night.
Bloomberg, top experts, great questions. The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
For Indigo, this is a 500 planes order. That's the biggest order ever in terms of number of planes. It doesn't change the short-term perspective on ramping up the production.
All our aircraft deliveries are delayed. The supply chain that was really decimated during COVID.
It's a real challenge for all the OEMs at the moment, but we absolutely have to have those aircraft delivered on time.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg, your global business authority.
So you come back to LA, having enjoyed some success and sort of seen what achieving something in the creative field feels like. How do you pivot from there into getting involved in fashion?
You know, my entry into fashion was really just out of chance. I was hanging out with one of my buddies and he pulled out a jacket and he's like, hey, I made this jacket. It was like a recycled, like military jacket and, you know, a few patches, a few this and that. And he's like, I made a bunch. Do you want to try to do this with me? It's pretty fun. And we eventually, you know, did a brand together, a small brand, and it sold to a store in LA called H. Lorenzo. We didn't know anything about business or margins or manufacturing or production. You know, we just kind of knew how to make cool stuff. And I literally hung out at that store every single day. And that, in some ways, was my fashion education because that store in particular bought tons of Japanese brands. You know? Okay. So they had, you know, Number 9, Mihara Yasuhiro, Julius, Diet Butcher, like all these amazing brands that are crafted incredibly. And I just used to just kind of look through and see how they would do their pockets or their sleeve lining or their proportions and all those things. And I started to kind of study in that way. And that really kind of was like my first education, mixing that with just kind of learning through trial and error.
And how are you supporting yourself during this period?
I was still like with my parents, like trying to make a little extra money. I worked at Guess. I worked at Brookstone. I had 2 jobs doing that. I had a telemarketing job at the same time. I kind of did everything I could to kind of keep doing that. It wasn't even like working to make it a big business. It was kind of working to do more of that. Eventually, like, I started picking up like freelance projects.
I was gonna say, how did you start to create that network where you start getting tapped to do freelance gigs?
This was like 15 plus years ago. The opportunities were really different and the landscape was really different. I was doing like trade shows in anywhere from like Vegas to Paris, where we'd show at Trenoy. And I'd go there and there'd be like 50 brands. And you have like a 10 by 10 booth and you're trying to explain your brand to stores internationally and, you know, those kind of things. And then you start getting to know people. And just that like process itself, you know, kind of put me in touch with more and more people. And at some point I was like the guy who knew how to make, you know, good stuff out of Los Angeles, because out of LA, we don't really make suiting, tailoring that well. We make denim, we make jersey, we make things that like touch water. And I loved craft. I love embellishing things and making something really special and stand out. And
how are you picking up those skills?
Fortunate enough for me, the law school I was in the fashion district. So I would just kind of leave class and, you know, go through the various buildings and find different sewers, and you can literally knock on doors and this person does embroidery and this person's a pattern maker and this person does this, and there's a wealth of knowledge you could pick up in each little studio. The most important idea I've ever had is really that failures and disappointments are just illusions, and the real variable is time. So if you could move forward without fear of failure or disappointment and do as much as you can in such a short amount of time, you'll continue to learn and grow.
So you start getting these freelance gigs, and so you're consulting, helping people that want to fabricate locally, basically?
Yeah, like at first it just started as like freelance small things, like this person wants to start a handbag company. And it grew into like smaller projects, to consulting like small brands, to like bigger brands in LA that would come here to like the wash houses or whatever, or some of the big denim brands. I would do like freelance consulting, freelance product development. I would kind of like pretend I had a big agency and it was really just me. So they're like, yeah, design, you know, these 15 things. And I would be like, all right, sure. And I would come in with like a rack of just like 30 things. And they were like, everybody's jaw would drop because they'd have like 9 designers in there. And they're like, how many people are on your team? How did you make this and this? And I'm like, oh, we don't talk about the studio too much. But it was really just kind of me like just making it work, you know? Not everything I made was good. I made so many like really bad things. I went down every mistake. You know, that freelance time like let me make things and learn on other people's dime in a way.
So at what point in this journey were you able to quit the 9-to-5s and really fully become someone who works in fashion?
I think there was a time when I like first started having kids, and you know, you have a family, so you have to start, you know, taking things a little bit more seriously. You stop thinking about like next year, you think about the next 10 years and what that looks like. And I had been freelancing and starting small brands here and there. None of them really like took off. And there was a thought that I really want to, you know, give it serious like 200% to see if this is really like for me, and like fully kind of commit, because up to then I was just kind of being creative and doing things like day to day, but there was no like big giant picture. I think by the time I had my third kid, we'd saved up enough money, and I was working on a project in my head that I started to make little things for, which would end up kind of being Amiri. It was just kind of based on the premise that luxury goods and that thought of luxury and exclusivity is a destination for a goal that not a lot of people try. So instead of kind of just chasing, you know, like middle of the road things, I love to make special things. And if I just put more care into the materiality and the fabrications and the thoughtfulness, and then was able to have a platform to display those, it would be hard to kind of deny it. So I designed the first collection for Amiri in a basement in Hollywood.
Where did you get the startup capital to sort of get that ball rolling and produce that first collection?
Yeah, we had saved up between like me freelancing and everything, we'd saved up like $30,000.
You and your wife?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And since I did almost like everything, I didn't need like 15 people to put together a collection. And I guess this is kind of where a little bit of a clever like strategy came into place. Instead of me walking into the store, I just had a few friends, like each one knew the buyer. And I'd say, do me a favor, just mention this brand to them. Don't make a phone call, like don't like try to connect us on the phone, just mention it to them. So like someone would be like, oh yeah, there's this brand Amiri, you should look into it. And they're like, oh sure. Then a week later, somebody like, oh, by the way, there's a brand Amiri you should look into, you know? And so many different touch points. By the time I made the phone call, I got in touch with the buyer. I'm like, hi, I have this brand Amiri. She's like, I've heard of your brand everywhere.
You know, as the idea of the brand comes into focus for you and you're putting together this collection, at what point do you settle on using your name as the brand, and how did you think about that decision?
It was really going to be my last like try at this, you know? I had a bunch of false starts leading up to it, and you know, being 38 years old and carrying a sewing machine into a basement with like the oil spilling on you, you know what I mean? While your other friends are like in law school, medical school, and professionals. It was such an endeavor, and it was so much like risk involved, and it was so personal that if I put my name on it, if I put my last name on it, it would have to be really good because my kids are gonna have that name. So naming it something else wasn't really like a thought in my head.
Fully invested in the brand that bore his name, Amiri kept a singular focus on elevated executions and immediately saw explosive growth. Not content to rest on his laurels, the designer and founder would push the Amiri brand beyond its core offerings, but soon would look to new partners to fortify the next stage of the business. So you get the collection in Maxfield. Obviously, they are going to merchandise it on the floor and whatnot, but did you have any other sort of strategies around marketing it or creating audience and demand?
If you got into that shop, other shops around the world would call you. And when they would call, I would say, oh, I'm sorry, we're exclusively at Maxfield. They won't allow us to sell anywhere else, which is actually not true. I was not exclusively there, but it just sounded better. After years of like trying to convince somebody in your booth to buy your jacket or your sweater, to say no was even more powerful. You know, it made buyers want that product more. So I took that year, and instead of trying to sell like a bunch of things, I just kept refining the 6 items I had.
What were those 6 items?
It was a pair of jeans, t-shirt, flannel, leather jacket, hoodie. Literally my hit singles on a record. You know, it was the foundation of what we eventually built into Parisian runway shows. It was great because I got to focus on making them better and better and better, and also like understand the audience a bit more and understand like really my own creative direction, you know. So it was really an intense focus on those that really helped. And it went from a small rack in between Rick Owens and Carol Christian Pole to a big rack, to a bigger rack, to 2 racks, to 3 racks on the men's side. You know, for a certain year, it was like the highest volume of that entire store. And by that time, I had said no enough to enough wholesale accounts that I got to choose where I'd want to sell.
How are you managing, because you're also not only creating all of this, but you're also the CEO and you're running the business of this. How are you managing the cash flow side of things?
Thankfully, I had a pretty good deal with Maxfield's, where they would pay like a couple weeks after. And also, like, you have to understand, like, the rent on a basement is not expensive. You know, family works for free, so, you know. And I ran most of the production myself. And as I said, like, the one thing I learned from my parents is, like, don't overextend yourself. You know, remember, like, you're fallible. So I always kind of kept this distance from pushing the finances to a point where we couldn't breathe. After that first year of just selling to one store, we had like accounts around the world waiting. And the decision was not to open 100 accounts and be everywhere and explode. The decision was to pick the best in like every region and sell to them at a really like limited quantity, because I never wanted to be back in the position where I'm trying to sell someone something. I always wanted to be in the position where I created something really good and I can dictate how much is in the world. I used to believe that my personal success was really dependent on so many outside variables. And over time, I really came to learn that it's really your belief in yourself, your ability to show up consistently, and then present something of quality that can be timeless.
Around this time is when you introduced the MX-1 Moto jeans, which were explosive, to put it mildly.
Sometimes it just takes one thing to be your like pillar. I think every brand has that like one thing. You can call it like your hit single, that every concert they're gonna want you to play that song or whatever it is, regardless of how much you love or don't love that song anymore, or whether you've progressed on. And for me, it was denim, because it's one thing I didn't have to make in Europe. I could buy the best denim in the world. I can wash it in the best place to wash denim other than, you know, Japan, California. And I could be part of that process.
I've seen you talk before about very purposefully sort of throttling the growth of the denim business to keep everything balanced. And I'm curious, in these moments, you're making these decisions both as a creative director and a designer, but also as a CEO who is dealing with payroll and has a staff and all these things. So how were you sort of threading that needle?
The important thing to know is that regardless of how well something is selling, you have to keep evolving and, like, of course, respecting where you come from, because I still love making denim. I still think we make incredible jeans. I like really stand by it, but I don't think it's the only thing we're great at. So it took a lot of discipline to say, okay, we are not gonna do this much of this, and we're gonna keep expanding into other categories, because aesthetics and fashion will come and go. But if you create a brand and you protect that brand, it can last through every cycle of trends in fashion and things like that. Maybe there'll be a year people will wear baggy jeans, or they'll go back to skinny. It won't matter, because the brand is strong and we've protected it. So not letting the audience dictate everything you make and trying to chase, that one thing can really ensure your longevity if you are, disciplined enough.
So the brand begins to explode, although you are tempering that growth as much as possible. Mm-hmm. How long was it from that initial capsule to the place where you felt like this is reaching that virtuous cycle where the snowball is rolling of its own volition, and I feel confident and comfortable that the money's coming in?
I think for me, there's never been a moment of comfort or this thought oh, we made it. I don't go to sleep with that. I go to sleep with anxiety and I'm not doing good enough and I probably should have done more and I could have done better is probably how I'm just cursed to be, mm-hmm. So yeah, there's never been a moment where I've felt comfortable, it's kind of on its own thing. It's always been, wow, this is way bigger than it was last year.
In 2019, you end up taking on your first round of investment from OTB, from Renzo. Going into it, what did you feel like were the pros and cons that you were weighing? And then being now on the other side of it, how does it feel?
When you're starting something independently, it's you're playing literally with your own money and your own life, really. And I kept taking the profits of the company and putting them back into the company.
Yep.
And it can be a scary thing for an entrepreneur, And it's your friend at the blackjack table where his buddies are grabbing you and being dude, just go take the money and go to your room or whatever. And I was the friend that wouldn't leave the table. So I just feel I could win every hand. But there does come a time where the business is so massive that you have to think whether you need help strategically, you need help with infrastructure, or you need capital. At that time, we were talking to a few different people, and OTB was great because I had made friends with the founder, Renzo Rosso, who started, Diesel back in the day, mm-hmm. and he's just an independent, started from nothing, ended up, owning a luxury group, and he was a product guy and the kind of guy you can have a beer with. We were able to kind of figure out something where I could still kind of control my own company, and he could be there if needed.
And so you were able to sort of de-risk yourself and take some money off the table, and then also have this support system, both strategically and financially for the brand.
I think the most important thing was really just kind of having a mentor that you can kind of call.
Yep.
That's built something really enormous from nothing.
Where I was going to just say, where have you activated that, sort of most pointedly?
I think right now on the retail side, on opening our first stores, being a brand that's this new relatively, and opening your first store on Rodeo Drive during COVID.
It's a bold move.
Yeah, it was a really bold move, and a lot of people were like, "You're absolutely crazy." There's no independent brand on Rodeo Drive. There's no single designer since the only two Americans there are Tom Ford and Ralph Lauren. So that's really ballsy. But I also knew it's where we belonged. Seeing our brand perform in the context of European luxury throughout the world, in every account we were top 2 or top 3. Why would I not put my own store next to European luxury also? We ended up opening that first store, and it was the highest revenue store on our block per square footage the first year.
Paul Jacobson assured me that when he takes the new Hummer EV on long journeys, it's not just fun to drive, it's equipped to go the distance.
I hear so much about road trip anxiety that I wanted to experience it myself. My family likes to drive a lot, so I brought my daughter home from college in this, and it was great. I mean, the computer system is all intuitive. It tells you how to keep track of the battery. It tells you where the charging stations are. It tells you how much power you'll have when you get to the charging station. So it really puts a lot of your anxiety at ease. But as far as driving it, it's a treat.
So where are you on the charging stations? I know General Motors has made an investment in one company. How are we doing in this country generally in getting charging stations in?
So I think this is an area where obviously we can continue to improve as a country and a society. We're doing our best. We've committed almost $1 billion to EV charging. So we've taken that and looked at home charging solutions, local community solutions, and road trip charging solutions. With my daughter, what we would end up doing is probably stopping, grabbing a bite to eat, plugging it into a charger, usually a high-speed charger, to get as much charge as we can, and being there for 20 to 30 minutes. Get us a lot of range, and by the time we've used that range, we're tired, ready to stop again, etc. So it was a really good experience for me, and it's taught me, number one, what are the concerns of the consumer that are ultimately going to drive our vehicles, and then number two, where do we need to focus on addressing some of those anxious points for people?
Can you believe it's summer already? That means it's time for the Boston Pops Fireworks Spectacular. And Bloomberg will make sure you see all the fireworks, music, and special appearances by pop superstars En Vogue, chart-topping country duo Low Cash, and film, TV, and Broadway powerhouse Mandy Gonzalez. Plus the U.S. Army Field Band and the cast of the Broadway musical Ragtime. It all starts July 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
One of the ones we're working on at the moment is how do we charge back into Ukraine as soon as the European authorities say it's safe to fly in Ukraine again. Now, nobody knows when that is going to be. But we were Ukraine's second largest airline when the Russians invaded on the 24th of February last year. We will be Ukraine's biggest airline the week after they tell us it's safe to go back in there, because we're going to charge back in there. Initially, we have a plan to open up about 30 routes from 4 Ukrainian airports back into the European Union. And then we want to, I think within 6 to 12 months, open up 3 or 4 large bases in Ukraine. And we're talking to the Ukrainian authorities about creating an environment, cost agreement, on which we could lead the charge of air travel into a post-war Ukrainian recovery.
From New York City,
London, and Sydney,
from Washington,
Tokyo,
9 a.m. in Beijing and Shanghai.
Good morning, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Here's what I'm watching.
You do not want to miss this
Is
story.
there the kind of upside?
With his brand's ascent from upstart to heavyweight complete, Amiri turned his attention to crafting a long-term blueprint that would defy passing trends and achieve the lasting impact of the fashion houses he revered. And as the company reached maturity at light speed, Amiri could also reclaim a work-life balance and invest in becoming a mentor in order to inspire and educate the next generation. 2019, 2020, and into 2021, there was an aesthetic evolution within the brand. My observational hypothesis is, you start the brand in a very mid-'80s rock-centric vibe.
Yeah.
And in that period, 2019, 2020, some more of your Far Side hip-hop influences start to sort of bleed into the brand, whether it's the footwear and eventually some of the cuts of the pants and stuff. One, was that a conscious move on your part? And two, given how celebrated and revered the silhouettes that you had created were, did you have any reticence to, you know, shake up things that were already working?
If I was trying to build a big business, I would have done more of the same, you know? If I wanted to build a good brand, I would evolve it. And I really chose the longevity of it. And I think that's one of the things about having like the brand as my own name. There has to be like a sense of like personal integrity there. And since the decision was to kind of expand the silhouette and expand the conversation and work on different archetypes of who my heroes are, maybe in the 80s was an inspiration for, you know, skinny rockers. Maybe in the 90s, it was an inspiration for skate kids or artists. I think pigeonholing yourself is sometimes like one of the worst things, you know, you can possibly do. I wanted Amiri to represent a lifestyle that was true to me growing up in California, me being a part of music and skate culture, and, you know, creating heroes based on what I knew and what I could relate to. My ideas usually come from a place of solution, of creating something that I feel should be there that doesn't quite exist at the moment.
You started as a bit of a renegade within fashion, and you know, by 2018, 2019, you're being nominated again and again for CFDA awards, and eventually showing in Paris, and really being embraced as a darling within fashion. What was that journey like, and where do you feel like you fit into that world today?
It's pretty tricky, right? Because the brand started with a good deal of commercial success, which is great from a business standpoint. But artistically, it makes it more difficult for you to prove yourself when you're selling hit singles, right? For me, it was never really to gain the acceptance of the establishment or anything like that. You know, that's one thing that I was kind of strict with, is I'm not doing this to get anyone's stamp of approval, you know, except for the people who are like supporting the brand. I do want to become so successful and to propose something so compelling that those institutions really at some point have to be like, this is legitimately, you know, good, and either we embrace this or we look irrelevant.
From day one, the brand has been wildly successful commercially. So how do you judge the ROI on the multi-million-dollar investment in a Paris runway show?
A lot of things are like context, you know? Virgil had this thing that he would did it once on like a Zoom or something, and he was like, this tin can, you know, if you see it in the garage, it's like a piece of trash. And then if you see it in a museum, you know, it's a piece of art. I always like related to that kind of thought process. And those big runway shows and those kind of platforms are really important for us in the growth of the brand, because it's a week of you see the best in the world show, you know, specifically in the menswear weeks, and you get to see them all alongside of each other. And the brand doesn't look like a startup from LA. It looks like a heritage brand with a history, the point of view, with the perspective, because it is. It's not in a basement anymore. It's in a giant garden in the middle of Paris.
What are the qualities about yourself that you hold on to the most tightly?
The conviction I have in moving forward and achieving my dreams while still maintaining the humility I had from starting with nothing.
What do you think your biggest strength as a leader is, and what is something that you continue to work on?
I think my biggest strength as a leader is probably my ability to lead from the ground floor. Like, I've never seen myself as someone who is in a different room than my team, you know, coming up with things and doing that. If you're doing the work, we are doing the work together. You know, there won't be a time where you're here on a Saturday and then I'm not here on a Saturday. I think that's always been my favorite part of what I do, is working with people and showing them that I believe in them as much as they believe in me and what we're doing, you know, because then you're really like working from the heart. I think any creative who makes something really substantial and in some ways bigger than themselves has that thought of their connection to it. And I never want to feel that we're so big that I'm not in the garage. And that's really helped me stay connected to what we started with. There's plenty of Saturdays where I'll just come to the studio with my dog and no one else, and I'll work 7 hours straight doing exactly what I was doing in the basement. And as long as I can kind of keep that energy going, I'll still feel really connected to what we do.
There are so many different facets of this business that you touch and engage with as a creative and as a business person. What parts do you get the most satisfaction from?
I recently brought on like our first CEO here, and I stepped down as CEO like a month ago, because I've just come to the realization that in order for what you do to be good, you have to care about it and you have to be happy. And in order for you to care about it, you have to enjoy doing it, because it's really hard. It's a terrible job, and I would recommend it to nobody unless you feel like you're okay suffering through every part of it because you love it so much. For me, that part was really just the creative part of imagining things in my head and making them come to life, whether it's a sneaker or a runway show. That gives me the most amount of pleasure. And I think that's where like my full potential will lie.
You've talked about having a family and that sort of creating a catalyst for urgency around, putting both feet in and committing fully to the vision of making Amiri what it could be. But being a creative also requires a certain amount of selfishness. And being a father and a husband requires a certain amount of selflessness. How do you maintain that balance?
The one thing to really kind of consider for anyone kind of going into this business is you're going to have to sacrifice a lot of time, and you're going to have to be like really selfish with your time. And people will pay the price of your disappearance, and you're gonna miss a lot of things. The first 4 years of starting this company, I missed so many things with my family and my kids, and it was difficult to kind of make sense of that, because every real successful entrepreneur I talk to, at the very end, they're always asking, well, what did you think on your career? And they says, I missed the time with my kids. I didn't get any, or I wasted it all, And I was like, man, you didn't really catch a W then, did you, And that's like this common thread between a lot of like older successful people that I've met. And for me, the moment I had a chance to kind of bring people in to kind of alleviate some of those responsibilities, and I can carve out more time with my kids, I did. And the best part is that now my kids are really kind of as much into the business as I am. They come to the fashion shows, they're curious about every store. They have a sense of pride in everything that we do. And it's like almost like the time that I took away from them, I kind of gave back in a gift of that pride. Money really is just a means to an end. What's truly important are your values, your friendships, your relationships, your experiences. All those things should derive from somewhere natural and organic, never from the pursuit of money or anything materialistic.
As we approach the 10th anniversary of Amiri, you've accomplished an inordinate amount, more than many, if not almost all in the space. They're your contemporaries. What do the next 10 years look like for the brand?
I think that the next 10 years is really evolving the brand more into a world where it's not just kind of items of clothing, and it's more of something non-tangible where Amiri kind of represents a spirit or a lifestyle that connect back to California and being a teenager in Sunset Boulevard or a skater or, dreaming, There's two really big rewarding things about what we've done. One is building an amazing business, and two is building a template for the next Mike Amiri to see that you don't need to just sell your t-shirts on your website. You don't need to just sell to a couple stores and make a little money.
To that point, in 2021, you launched the Amiri Prize, which is sort of a scholarship of $100,000 that you invest in a young designer. What was the auspice for launching that program?
The Amiri Prize was really created to help foster undiscovered talent that traditionally would not have an avenue to be on the map, but not to do it in a way where here's some prize money and good luck, It's not just money, it's understanding, it's strategy, it's knowledge of how to use that money, because it can go really fast if you don't have a plan. So the Amiri Prize is very different from anything else because not only do you get $100,000 funded by us, you also get a personal mentorship with me. And then you have access to every C-level and every manager in Amiri in my company. I want there to be more of us. I want there to be a generation of brands coming out that are new and that present something new, because the whole industry really is rewarded from these new ideas kind of getting a platform.
At this point in the business, you obviously have an extremely deep investment in your product, but you also have to manage a team, you have to manage your investors, and you have to manage your customers. Is it ever okay to compromise in order to sort of sate the most of these different masters?
I don't think it's ever okay to intentionally compromise. There are going to be things you wish you did better, but to say I'm pretty sure this is not going to come out good, but let's just do it anyways because it'll sell, is the worst thing you could possibly do, because that starts the beginning of you not caring about your brand and what you created, and that bleeds into everything you make, moving forward. You can't have an inch of doubt or second guessing, and when I was at that kind of basement stage, and I have the 3 kids, and there's not the luxury of thinking twice about anything, to be really successful, you have to be irrationally and audaciously and have a conviction of something grand without a doubt, though. There can't be that thing, because then you're going to get shook. So for me, when I made that decision that this was going to be that big and we were going to be successful, there was really no room for anything else.
I put that vision out there. That actually happened the way I wanted it to.
If I ever get another opportunity, I'm not gonna screw that up again.
I'm Cal Penn. Welcome to Getting Warmer.
This is cool as shit. Wow.
If you take 2 atoms and fuse them together, it gives off a huge amount of energy. Would you like to see what $20 billion buys you in the French countryside?
Where is there money to be made in space?
You're at the end of the Earth, and it's freaking cool.
I don't have strong feelings for or against crypto. I
like finance.
We have big things to come, and I can't wait to show you.
There has to be some sort of shock value.
Thought about tapping out a bunch of times.
My goal is to have anything that's deemed impossible.
Sports and money. They've always gone together.
But never before have sports been so massively influential and as lucrative as they are today.
We set out to find what's happening and what's about to happen at the nexus of business, sports, and culture.
From the pickleball courts of Arizona,
to the kabaddi tournaments in India,
to the cornhole boards at your local tailgate. This is what's next in sports.
From the world of politics
We're not going to be relying upon countries whose values we don't share.
to the world of business.
It's all about corporate power at the end.
Balance of Power, live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters.
We're going to be more excited what's in store for you.
How long will it take? How many years? Why don't we take this one day at a time?
Good luck. Everybody has a perspective.
Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Join hosts Anne-Marie Hordern
It's the one area, really, of bipartisanship.
Well, I think we're getting more, but
That's optimistic.
and Joe Matthew.
The debt ceiling is looming. How close are we going to get to the line before you start to worry?
Alongside Kaylee
The
Lyons.
door was open for regulators to do more, and that puts the Fed between a rock and a hard place.
As they deliver news
This is such an important economic issue.
He's no longer trying to run away from
That
it.
really blew some minds.
insight,
We can both invest in law enforcement and also make sure that communities feel safe in their own skin.
and analysis.
I think your audience will get this more than most.
This is not the Republican Party that you know.
It allows him to do what he did so successfully in 2020, which is run against crazy.
From and about politics' biggest power players.
This was the zombie case, and it's now more than well alive.
That's for sure. With two more potentially to come.
I'm willing to have this battle.
It is vitally important.
This is the intersection of Washington and Wall Street.
Bringing people directly to the decision makers
Right.
that impact your investments and your life.
Balance of Power, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
What do you like most about your job?
I think the people. I mean, ultimately, we're a people business. A lot of what my job is as CEO of the company is to give those people sort of motivation, to tell them where we're going, to encourage them to come up and do their best work, to encourage them to collaborate. Sometimes you sort of think you're almost a psychologist, as you are a business leader, I think, sometimes.
And so what's your best piece of advice?
I love pitches. I love being sort of leading from the front, if you like, and spending times with teams. I love to see the work that we're doing. When we pitch for a piece of new business, often when we come together. So I guess I try and put myself in the seat of the client. And what's the client going to think when they see this work? Are they going to be excited? Is it going to turn their brand around? How's it going to resonate with their consumers? So as much as possible, I think probably I try and play that role.
Bloomberg UK, your source for news and analysis covering the biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services, and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
There's much oil to be found in the lower 48 at this point, or even in, let's say, Alaska as well, where mostly we know where all the oil is, and there's no more big Permian Basin kind of deposits anywhere.
People have said that over time, and then we've always been surprised. And so the U.S. has been explored more than any other place in the world. I think the industry has a good idea, but technology allows you sometimes to recover things that you haven't been able to before. That's the story of shale. The other one that continues to be a positive story is Deepwater Gulf of Mexico, where we'll go out and drill in a mile or more of water depth and then go down several more miles and find large fields. And the Gulf of Mexico is still relatively underexplored compared to the onshore. So I think there's still room for more discoveries.
I was raised by independent people, so I wanted to continue the tradition, I guess. I never wanted to be a spectator. I wanted to be a player.
In 1988, a graffiti-obsessed 17-year-old in Astoria, Queens, had an idea. Sasha Jenkins would combine his love of art, hip-hop, and humor to found a series of highly successful independent print publications before turning his unique lens to television production and then documentary filmmaking. Along the way, he would go from documenting the culture to shaping it, all while providing a template for creativity that's informed countless careers, including mine. And it all started with one idea.
How did your parents' professional life inform your career ambitions?
My dad was a filmmaker, my mom was a painter. So when I look at all the stuff that I've done, it's been a combination of moving pictures and still pictures and storytelling, right? So my parents are storytellers. And so at a young age, that was instilled in me. I would say my parents are my biggest influence, actually. My dad was mainly a documentary filmmaker, one of the founding producers of Sesame Street, the Africa correspondent for a show called Black Journal. So there's footage of him all over Africa in the 60s and 70s doing his thing. My dad died when I was really young. And like back then, you know, seeing my dad work, he did a feature film called Cane River that was only recently released after like 40 years, like a couple of years ago. But it was shot in New Orleans. I got to spend the summer there. I was on set. So I was around this stuff most of my life.
You were born in Philly, and your early life was in Maryland.
Yep.
But your sort of most formative years happened in Astoria in the late 70s, early 80s. How did that shape your worldview?
Astoria was very racially polarized, right? Although my building was very mixed, there wasn't much intermingling amongst people. In Astoria, one thing that brought people together was graffiti. That put me in a unique position to learn different things about different people, because what I realized is the white kid who likes heavy metal has a boombox, and the black kid who likes hip hop has a boombox is the same kid, the same guy. When I was coming up, I was into skateboarding, I was into hardcore music, hip hop, things that are very common today for kids of color. When I was into it, I was a weirdo black dude. Now it's like kids in the hood, which is great. Their world is way more broad. I think that's one of the reasons why I've somehow stayed contemporary, was my understanding and involvement. It's also, for me, very important to be directly involved, because I learn from hip hop, from hardcore, from graffiti, or whatever. Being a practitioner and being involved or understanding these cultures, these subcultures, has always been very germane to my evolution. I think having that experience really helped me sort of navigate the world at large.
How did you end up with things like punk rock and skating on your radar?
Skating was like the 70s. I had an older sister, and we had a skateboard, and the first or second real skateboard wave. And so when we moved from Maryland, I still had my little skateboard, but I got into BMX before skating, and once BMX started to fade, I got into skateboarding again. A friend of mine named Haji, who I started Beat Down newspaper with, he was into skating too, so we kind of got into it together, and we would travel to different places to skate spots. You go to the Brooklyn Banks under the Brooklyn Bridge, or the Harlem Banks in Harlem, or Bay Ridge, or different places. You would travel to go to different skate spots. It was very much like graffiti. Graffiti writers travel all over the place. Skaters travel all over the place. And a friend of mine named Chaka, who was wound up being in lots of bands. He grew up in the Woodside Projects. He wanted to get into skating, and he knows into rock, and he gave me a tape. And I listened to that tape. I didn't know any of the bands, and I asked him about this one specific band. I was like, what's this band right here? He's like, yo, it's the Bad Brains, and guess what? They're black. I was like, get the out of here. He's like, the Bad Brains, they're all black. I didn't know who the Bad Brains were, whatever, but something about their music spoke to me, and so I was like, I gotta buy the record. And he sold me his beat-up copy of Eye Against Eye of Bad Brains for like more money than he paid for it. But that was a gateway for me to get into a whole other world and one day be in a band with a member of the Bad Brains.
How seriously did you take your life as a graffiti writer?
I wrote, just like people skate, and there are professional skaters and there are kids who just skate. There are way more kids who just skate than there are professionals, right? So I was a kid who wrote. I wasn't anyone important, I wasn't anyone special, but what I learned from graffiti, between politics, between networking, before the internet, before cell phones, I'm meeting all kinds of kids from all over the place. And it piqued my interest in wanting to do a zine. I did more time thinking about graffiti and writing about graffiti and publishing magazines about graffiti than doing graffiti, but I'm okay with that at this point. My biggest early supporter was my mom. When I told her I wanted to do a graffiti magazine and that it was going to cost me $1,000 in 1988, I didn't think she'd give me the money, and she found the money and gave it to me. That belief in me, or just being willing to take a chance, was major.
What was the auspice for you to actually get into publishing a zine yourself?
My friend Chaka, he was on the hardcore scene, and in the hardcore scene, there were zines, right? So it's a combination of hardcore zines, and then Phase 2 published a magazine called International Get Hip Times, which when I purchased that, it just blew my mind. And I wrote to Phase 2, and I was like, hey man, I'm a fan of what this zine, like I want to do one myself. He wrote me a 6-page handwritten letter telling me that I could do it. He didn't know me from a can of paint, pun intended, right? But that was like, put a battery in my back. And so my friend Chaka and his friend Freddie Alva did a hardcore compilation tape where they recorded all these bands and put it on a cassette called the New Breed Compilation. And it was in a comic book plastic, and it came with a zine, a booklet. I asked them who the printer was, and basically, if you know the New Breed Compilation, and you see the first issue of my zine, it's the same thing. So usually I learn from my friends, right? So I saw what my friends did, and it inspired me to do what I did.
And how did you put together the money to get this printed and figure out the distribution and all that part?
I asked my mom for the money, and in '88, asking my mom for $1,000 was like no small feat, and I didn't think she'd be able to get it to me, but my mom gave me the money. And as far as distribution, there was only 1 or 2 stores in the world at that time. There's a place on West Broadway called Soho's At. Writers from all over the world would go there because it was around the corner from Henry Chalfant's studio. So you'd go to the store and you knock on the door to maybe meet Henry. And so while I was down there selling my zine, me and this guy Hush went over. He said, let's go knock on Henry's door. Knock on Henry's door. Henry doesn't open up. Carl Weston does. Carl Weston would go on to start something called Videograph. And so all these things just happened the way they happened. All the things that I've done, I've learned from mentors. I've had great mentors. I was able to realize who I needed to get an education from. I tapped into those folks, did what I could to help them. In return, they imparted lots of knowledge on me. Henry Chalfant, for instance, was a big influence on me. I was a huge fan of his work as a kid. I'd study subway art in my art class. One day I'd go on to meet Henry, and he'd become a friend and a mentor.
So how many issues of graphic scenes did you create?
There's about 4 issues of graphic scenes that we made. The first 2 were more elaborate in terms of printing, like spending real money, and then later issues were more like the Xerox style.
And where were you getting like all the assets and the photos and all that kind of stuff to fill it?
I was snapping photos getting some photos from Henry, getting photos from other writers. I mean, in graffiti, photographs are like trading cards, right? So I had some hot trains that people wanted, so I was able to trade with people.
And how many units of this were you selling at the time?
My zine, the first issue, I probably printed up 5,000 copies. Sold most of them.
How do you get from creating these 4 issues to creating the first hip-hop newspaper, Beatdown?
So Haji, again, who's a friend I grew up with, Haji Akibade, is a guy I grew up with who was into skating, into graffiti, and he was a producer, right? He made hip-hop beats, and he actually like kind of worked with Marley a little bit, like helping out Marley and stuff. I had gone away to a community college in upstate New York, and I worked on the school newspaper, and I saw the print bill, and it was like $600. I was like, that's it? I came back to New York, and I connected with Haji, and I said, look, let's do this hip-hop newspaper. It only costs whatever. We went to the printer, which is across the street from Queensbridge Housing Projects. It was like $640.30, and we went with exact split in half, cash, change, everything, paid for.
And, you know, at this point, it's still very nascent stages of hip-hop publishing, but The Source is happening and is a pretty big deal by 91, 92. What was it that made you want to create your own platform versus trying to sort of, you know, get a job at The Source or, you know, or work within any sort of existing structure?
I was raised by independent people, and so I wanted to continue the tradition, I guess. I had no desire to write. I take great pride and much respect to The Source and everyone who's gone through there, but I've never written for The Source. I never really wanted to write for The Source. Not that The Source isn't great, but I didn't really care. You know, for me, it's like, for years, sports, I wasn't into sports because I'm like, why am I getting excited about watching sports? It's not me doing it. I could never get into sports, watching it, like being a fan, it's like, what do I care about watching someone do it? But once you start to play a game and you understand it, then sports, watching sports and being a spectator becomes more interesting, right? But I never wanted to be a spectator. I wanted to be a player.
At its peak, how big did Beatdown get in those initial years that you were involved?
Beatdown really took off after we left. We were there for a year. Beatdown went on for years and became a magazine and printed and has all kinds of fans all around the world. So when I was doing it, for us, success was going to Tommy Boy and knowing that from studying The Source, Tommy Boy always took out the back cover. So we knew that Tommy Boy paying for the back cover for a couple of years paved the way. So we went to Tommy Boy and offered them the same deal. And that sort of paved the way for us to have money to publish the magazine if we had no ads for a long time.
You mentioned meeting Carl Weston, and I know that you were, you know, pretty heavily involved in some of the seminal editions of Videograph. How did you sort of, you know, fit into that creative matrix, and then what did that platform really offer you?
Back then, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and Carl wanted to be a filmmaker as well, so we had that in common. Carl was older than me and had equipment, and we talked about film and things we wanted to do, because ultimately, Videograph was a platform for him to make money to make films. So I was a younger cat in that matrix, and I was just there and then. It just started to happen.
What kind of reach did Videograph have in that moment? I think, you know, it's hard for young people today with this ubiquity of the internet to understand, but, you know, Carl was selling VHS cassettes, but they had reach.
Carl used to wear sweatpants, and sweatpants pockets are kind of loose, and he had knots like this of cash. Big ass knots. I mean, it was VHS, right? So people were buying them, but obviously, I would say 2 out of 5 writers were buying them, and like the other 3 were just bootlegging the shit. But considering how much it was bootlegged, it got around.
Big Black Mac with no seeds on my bun. Chucking spears to stun. Run, Frosty, run to your unique cave, shelter from the sun. Want to step to me? That can be fun. Be alone, Yoko, or I'll be out like the flying nun.
How did the poetry moments happen?
Poetry moments and Videograph happened because I was doing poetry. Some of it was really bad, but I liked doing it. That was back when we drank 40s, so drink a 40 and just freestyle poetry. And it was, you know, you do that and then people recognize you on the street. And there was a commercial for my magazine in Videograph One, so it's based on a true story where I was walking down West 4th Street near the McDonald's that used to be there. And some kid recognized me from Videograph and said something slick. And all I did was I just literally went behind my head and did this. Like, just made a funny gesture. And 25 dudes just started chasing us through the West Village and yelling Videograph. And I was like, damn, this shit's crazy, man. So they didn't want my autograph, they wanted to hurt me.
So you start Beat Down, and in that you meet two very consequential people that would be collaborators with you for years after that, in Elliott Wilson and Chairman Mao.
Me and Haji, we did Beat Down, and I guess Elliott got a copy and called, made a voicemail. He called the voicemail and said he wanted to be down, so then he got down with us. And then Chairman Mao, I was interning at a place called Third World Newsreel, which has Black Panther films and all kinds of leftist, interesting, people of color shit. And the folks there had always told me, you love hip hop, you've got to meet this guy, Jeff Mao. He's a DJ, he loves hip hop. So one day I'm in the elevator, I see an Asian guy with a bald cut and a Carhartt jacket, and I'm like, yo, you're Jeff Mao, right? And this is like, 91. And so that's how I met Jeff. And, he was a record collector and was very knowledgeable about hip hop. So that was the initial nucleus of Beat Down. And, those are cool times.
And after about a year, your relationship with Haji sours. You and Mao and Elliott all end up leaving. But what happened that sort of was the catalyst for that?
We laugh about it now. It's just stupidity, just like miscommunication, and misunderstandings and egos and just being young and not really being smart. We look back at it now and we say, wow, we were foolish to do that. But, childhood friends have squabbles. Because ultimately, that's what it was. It didn't have to be that deep. How do you tell a good idea from a bad idea? Well, sometimes a bad idea looks real sexy and tasty, but as soon as you bite into it, it feels kind of funny. Don't let your ego get in the way of the hype of what you thought this thing was, or what you told people it was. If it's not right, you usually know it, and it's time to back up out of it if you can.
Beat Down was a strictly hip-hop magazine. Shortly thereafter, Ego Trip starts to come into focus, and you form a partnership with initially Elliott and then also with Chairman Mao. Mm-hmm. What was the idea for that, and what was that moment of innovation that brought that together?
It's very simple. I wanted it to be more of a reflection of my life, right? I like skateboarding, I like rock, I like hip-hop. And I also thought, what are we offering? Why does the world need another hip-hop whatever? At that point, there were more magazines. So it's very simply, if we have other stuff beyond hip-hop, it just opens us up to more advertising, right? So skate, rock, whatever, fashion. So I just wanted something that was a little bit more contemporary to kind of how I lived at that point. You have art from Mr. Caves, comic strip called Tales from the Rails. Interviews with skaters. My friend Chris Keefe was in the first issue. Chris is someone I skated with in Queens. He went on to be one of the Supreme guys and professional skateboarder, So it's it was more of a reflection of where I felt culture was going.
How did you put together the pieces to go get Ego Trip printed and then distributed as well?
Well, first we had to get money to make it. So that's when I went to Henry Chalfant. So I went to Henry and said, give me 10 grand. And I'll turn that 10 grand into much more than that. And so with that money, I think we got a computer and were able to print 1 or 2 issues.
And how did you guys conceive of the sort of business side of this partnership?
Business side is kind of an overstatement or understatement. We were just doing, right? No one was formally trained in business. It's all instincts.
That was a time where everything was very balkanized, right? Between white magazines, black magazines, women's magazines, men's magazines. Ego Trip obviously lived in the middle of a very complicated Venn diagram. When you would take these meetings to try to sell these ads, were the marketing people receptive? Do they understand your vision?
There were enough people who did, but there were a lot of people who didn't because they're still putting everything in a box. Like, no, kids who like hip hop don't like this. Like, what do you mean? Like, white kids who like rock love hip hop at this point. Like, you can't keep putting people in boxes. There were people who didn't get it, but there were enough people on the advertising side who got it and got us to a point where, like, we even had credit with our printer. All of that coming together made Ego Trip possible because, again, outside of the 10 grand, we didn't have shit.
The top names in global leadership are on Bloomberg.
We have reformed the whole ecosystem around attracting foreign direct investment.
To get everybody to the table was the most difficult thing. Now we're here. The next is consummation.
The commitment is there. Now what we need to see is the actions.
Nobody covers the top global leaders like Bloomberg Television and Radio, your global business authority. Lots happening on Wall Street.
There are so many factors at play today.
It remains tight in certain parts of the economy.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insight.
Crisis is too strong a word, and words like that get used a lot.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
America's economy needs a diversity of institutions.
That's something that Wall Street pays a lot of attention to.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week, live Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
BSO Now is your online home for weekly Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. See new concerts that go behind the scenes, plus acclaimed archival concerts. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsor, Bank of America.
From the world of politics to the world of business. Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, hosts Anne-Marie Hordern and Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters. Get the latest from and about politics' biggest power players at the end of every trading day. Balance of Power, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
This is Bloomberg.
The moment news breaks, no one covers the world like Bloomberg.
The image of Vladimir Putin as the all-powerful leader has been rattled already.
History was made here at the federal courthouse in Miami when Donald Trump became the first ever former president to ever be arraigned on federal charges.
We're going to need a new engine technology, and that's where the real battle lies. And whoever makes that decision first is going to have a huge impact on this industry.
Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Having founded 3 iconic magazines from his bedroom in his mother's apartment, Sasha would guide Ego Trip into book publishing and television production. While creative differences would ultimately bring about the end of the group, Sasha's mix of insight, humor, and deep understanding of culture would beget his next move into the world of filmmaking. Initially, it's you, Elliot, and Mao, and then in 1996, Gabe Alvarez joins, and then in 1997, Brent Rollins joined. How did that happen?
Gabe was working at a magazine called Rap Pages in LA with Brent. They had a section called Underground Zine where they wrote about zines. And so me and Elliot were flying out to LA to do a Cypress Hill cover story. And we met Gabe. He interviewed us for the column in Rap Pages. And we just thought he was cool. And so at one point we're like, yo, dude, why don't you come out here and move to New York and work on a magazine? We had no money. I said, but yo, you can stay at my mom's house in Queens. You're good. My mom's good with it. And he's crazy enough to do it. So Gabe came out, moved to Astoria, Queens, and stayed in my bedroom. And soon after, I guess Brent followed suit. And then also, as I remember it, you reached out to us saying that you wanted an intern or something, right?
Yeah, I was finishing my senior year of high school, and I had to get an internship. And I sat there with all the rap magazines. My taste leaned in the indie way. And I looked at On the Go and I looked at Ego Trip, and I was like, On the Go looks really pretty, but Ego Trip makes me laugh on every page. Like I live for every inside joke, everything you guys put in the folios and all that stuff. And I just called over and over for 2 weeks until somebody called me back. And that was how I got down. When Ego Trip started, how did the humor and that voice develop in the magazine?
I think if you really look at what we were doing Ego Trip with the ads, the internal ads, those are like early memes. I mean, humor to me is super important. Like, it's a sign of intelligence. If you have no sense of humor, I can't with you, you know? And I think all of us at Ego Trip have a sense of humor, and there's a level of diversity there. You know, Gabe Alvarez is Mexican from LA, and Brent's from LA, he's black and Vietnamese, and Jeff Now is, you know, Chinese from Massachusetts, and Elliot is Greek, Ecuadorian, and black, and I'm African American and Haitian. So we covered a lot of ground, and there were a lot of things to laugh at. I mean, I think things are so up. If you can't laugh, you're really up. I would say race in my career in general has been a pretty consistent through line in terms of how I'm trying to communicate with people and have conversations with people. And so Ego Trip was the foundation for that. I think the most important idea I've ever had was to listen to the voice in my head. You're walking around all day, you're by yourself. Who are you talking to? Well, you're talking to someone who's in your head. The thing about the person in your head, typically that voice or that individual has your best interests at hand. So I'm not saying the voice is right all the time, but most of the times in my life where I transitioned to something new or tried something different, it was because the voice told me to do it.
In 1998, you guys decide that you are done with publishing a bi-monthly magazine. What was the sort of catalyst for that?
Well, we started doing these books. We did the book of rap lists, which has lots of fun facts about hip hop and music and records, and people seem to dig that. And we were thinking about what was next, but we had this idea to do a book about racism. So then from there, we did the big book of racism. Someone at VH1 gives it to a woman named Christina Norman, who was a big cheese.
Yes.
She likes the book. She then gives it out to a bunch of her staff. And someone says, hey, we should do a television show with these guys. So VH1 reaches out to us, and we did a show called TV's Illest Minority Moments, presented by Ego Trip. And so we just looked at the roles people of color played on television over the years. That did okay. So let's do more. So then we came up with a series called Race-O-Rama, which is another exploration into race, 3-part series.
You mentioned politics and race humor was very central to sort of the latter half of Ego Trip as a magazine, and then obviously was the sort of core premise of the Big Book of Racism. Were people wrapping their heads around the satire and the commentary that you were providing?
Some people didn't get it. We have a section in the book called The Yellow Pages, right? And it's about Asian culture. Now, mind you, Jeff Now is Chinese, Brent Rollins is half Vietnamese. They're leading the charge in some of these jokes or whatever we're exploring. But the Asian woman who worked the publisher was like, I refuse to work on this. This is not cool. So it's like where we are now, like comedians can't do shit. Like, imagine if that book came out now, it would be crazy. We're all very so sensitive, and I think sensitivity is good, but I think there needs to be balance. Like, people are too precious now. It's like, if you can't have a good racial joke with your white friend or your black friend or anyone, then we're and those jokes are good only when you understand what. It's like, if I make a joke about white people, I'm like, yeah, white people, they can't, whatever, they can't rap. It's like, no, white people can rap. That's not funny. If you make a joke about a white person who likes the Smiths, and there are little nuances in there that you know, and only a Smiths fan will know, that person will laugh. It's like, oh, shit, black dude knows his shit, right? And for me, it's always been communication. It's like, when you like all these diverse sorts of things, it's communication, it's intelligence. It gives you information that you need to survive and communicate and to make shit. And I think a lot of that is lost now. How do you process criticism? Well, I was once a critic myself, and so I come into it with a bit of an understanding of where people might be coming from, and sometimes people are coming from places that are personal to them, and sometimes their biases bleed into it, so you've got to take it with a grain of salt. If you're someone who makes art that is in the public eye, you have to be willing to accept that the public might not like it, or someone in the public might not like it, but you got to just stick with what your message is, and as long as you believe in what you're doing, that's all that matters. I did a series recently called Everything's Gonna Be All White. It's on Showtime. It's about race in America from the perspective of not just black people, but people of color, and I got barbecued by everybody, including black people, based on a trailer that they saw. They didn't even see the series. At first, I was a little hurt, I guess. So like, damn, I'm on some shit trying to like make some change. But then you realize like, yo, people don't like your shit. As long as you like your shit and you stick with your shit, take your shit.
So you and Ego Trip do a series of shows that are race focused, and then this births another piece of content that you made that I think was years ahead of its time, the White Rapper Show.
Yeah.
What inspired you guys to make that, and how did you get it sold through?
One Christmas, we were meeting with an executive from a guy named Jim Ackerman at VH1. He took us out for drinks. Like, hey, you know, Race-A-Rama did great. What's next? What do you want to do? We're knocking them back. And I'm drunk, and I'm like, yo, we should do a show called The White House. We make white people move into a house and rap. And he looked at me and said, that's a brilliant idea.
And the show rated well, and
the show was a blockbuster. I mean, the ratings that they got then on that show, if a show got that now, I would be Dave Chappelle right now.
And that led to you guys doing the Miss Rap Supreme.
Yeah, but what happened was, White Rapper Show did well. New president of the company came in and said, you gotta do something that caters more towards women.
Instead of following up the hit with the sequel, you guys are tasked with figuring out a way to broaden the audience and particularly to court a female viewership.
Yep.
Which is a challenge in anything rap related.
Why would you think that a show about women in rap would do well when women in rap in real life don't do well? Now, the tables have turned. Women are killing it now. They're the I'm glad it finally happened, but back then, a show about women rappers wasn't going to be a big deal. But even those ratings, compared to now, like, people would kill for those ratings, but they just weren't good enough for another season.
When that comes to a close, it sort of ends the chapter of Ego Trip, and you guys never really collaborated again after that.
Right.
What happened?
The finale of the show, the last battle, we're in LA. They rented us a house up in Mulholland, like a fucking bawling out of control house. So we were all staying there, and the show wraps, everyone's hugging, people are popping bottles, we're all there. Then we turn around, yo, where's Elliot? I don't know. We go back to the house, everything, he bounced. He's just gone. Like, oh shit, what the f happened? I don't know. I met with Elliot and he was like, I'm not feeling it anymore. And that's his prerogative and he has his reasons, and I think ultimately he did what was best for him, which is all that matters. At that point, I was like, okay guys, let's keep going, let's keep doing this. And at a certain point, Ego Trip is like the Flintstones car, right? Like, there's no engine, there's his feet. If all the feet aren't going in the same direction, they ain't gonna move. So I think that different guys had different perspectives on what they wanted to do. So at that point, I said, well, I gotta keep on trucking. So I became a partner at a company called Roadside, and we launched a production company called Automatic Films. We did a series about a black skateboarder for BET called Being Terry Kennedy. So then I moved on. I moved on to continue to do film and television after that. How do you know when to pivot? My rule is when I can no longer learn and I can no longer teach anyone anything new, it's time to move on. It's time to try something new. Time to get scared a little bit. If you're not scared a little bit, then what are you doing?
You go to Roadside and make your first television projects as a soloist.
Yep. We did a documentary for VH1 called The Origin of Me. We brought 50 Cent down to South Carolina, where he learned about his ancestry. His great aunt still lived there. We found the plantation where his family worked, and the same family owned the house. But working on that doc, I had the opportunity to direct for the first time. We were in this museum for an organization called the Red Shirts. The Red Shirts were the proto-Klan. Before the Klan, they were the Red Shirts, right? So there's this museum, it's a tribute to the Red Shirts, right? So we go to the museum and like, Ron, the director, I don't know, he had a brain fart or he wasn't feeling it. He's like, go ahead, just go do it. In that moment, I had the opportunity to direct 50 and I was like, I can do this. This woman who was the curator of the museum or ran the museum was literally telling 50 Cent with a straight face that the slaves who worked here were happy. And so I say to 50 Cent, ask her, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that, ma'am? Well, because we knew them. Like, well, you're old lady, you're old as shit, but you're not old enough to know a slave, right? That doc really opened my eyes to what was possible. I mean, not that I had always been working towards that. I always wanted to be a director or a writer or whatever, but like that moment just opened doors for me in my mind. I'm not traditionally educated. You know, everything I've ever done, I've learned on the job. One of my best friends besides history is failure. Failure is your best friend. And if you're afraid to fail, you'll never succeed.
While you guys were working on those books, you started sort of a side project endeavor by linking up with Pat and Adrian from Mass Appeal. And that's sort of the beginning of this whole other part of your career that has really dominated the last like 10 to 15 years. How did that happen?
Well, coming off of doing one of the first graffiti zines, at that point, there were way more zines happening. Mass Appeal was a zine that just kept getting better and better, and I spent money on it. Like, I liked it. And one day I just called them up. I got the voicemail, and I said, listen, you don't know who I am, but I love your magazine. It's great to see the evolution. The photography's great. Keep going. That's it. I was a fan. I spent the money. I had no expectations. And they called me back and said, yeah, we know you want to hire you. I was like, nah, you can't afford me, but keep going. Keep doing it. So they kept going. They kept doing it. And I think they got to a point where they had money. They approached me again. They said, hey, man, what's up with you getting down with us now? And I said, you know what? I have an idea. I'll be the editorial director as an old-ass man, and I have a young man who I think could do a great job, and that person wound up being you.
Yes.
So I came on as the editorial director. Noah Callahan-Bever was the editor-in-chief. I liked Mass Appeal. I liked how it integrated all the things that I was interested in like graffiti and like fashion and music, and like it wasn't one thing. And I, again, connecting with my initial idea with Ego Trip, how the world was expanding and people like me weren't so weird anymore.
Mass Appeal starts to really grow as a magazine for several years. You know, obviously the passing of Pat was, I think, a pretty monumental setback both for the business and also for Adrian and for everyone emotionally.
I mean, I think about Pat now, I just laughed to myself because he's such a unique guy, funny guy. He was a good dude. And when he passed away, tragically, it just changed the game. I think for Adrian, it changed the game, a lot of stress. And magazines were starting to be in decline in terms of just people buying them, distribution. It was the game was changing. So I think it was 2008 when Mass Appeal shut down, the magazine. So it was just time.
At what point did you become a partner in Mass Appeal? Was that part of the relationship with Pat and Adrian, or did that happen afterward?
Well, I was a partner with Pat and Adrian in the magazine, and then the magazine died. And so when I joined Decon, I became a partner at Decon. And then when we started Mass Appeal, then I was a partner at Mass Appeal. Yeah, new company, new everything.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So Philip Leeds, who worked for Pharrell for many years, is a old friend of mine. And so I was talking to Philip, and we were talking about starting a creative agency, and he says, we should meet my friend Peter Binbender. He's got a company called Decon. So we go down and meet Peter, and he's like, I know who you are. You guys have a great idea, but I got you by 5 years. Sasha, why don't you come up here? Why don't you become a partner at Decon? So I was like, all right, worked it out. Came over to Decon, and about 6 months into it, I thought about Vice and all the things Vice were doing. I remember when the Vice guys used to write to us. The Vice guys were huge fans of Ego Trip and Mass Appeal, right? They won't tell you that now, but I've got letters, they called us. So I was like, wow, look what Vice has done. They're killing it, gotta respect that. Why can't we do the same thing? I spoke with Peter, and Peter's like, well, let's just bring Mass Appeal back. So I spoke to Adrian and got his blessing. He was happy to see what he had started with Pat to continue to live on.
And how did you guys end up getting Nas involved?
Peter and Nas had a bunch of interactions over the years, and Peter was constantly talking to Nas about what we were doing and stuff, and Nas signed up and has been a very important part of the credibility. I remember having a serious meeting with Lucian in Universal. That was a lesson in learning how deep people's relationships are in the game. Here I was with Peter and Nas meeting with Lucian about doing this deal with them, investing in us, and we have this big conversation, and Lucian leaves the room, we're looking at each other, eating and what's gonna happen? They come back, we're gonna do this deal. Coming from where I've come from in terms of doing magazines in my bedroom to having people wanting to invest millions and investing millions of dollars in the company was super exciting.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
For Indigo, this is a 500 planes order. That's the biggest order ever in terms of number of planes. It doesn't change the short-term perspective on ramping up the production.
All our aircraft deliveries are delayed. The supply chain that was really decimated during COVID.
It's a real challenge for all the OEMs at the moment, but we absolutely have to have those aircraft delivered on time.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Okay, so you're moving in on me, quick, distracting me with your fancy hands. I'm going to deal with your knight because it's really bothering me.
Ah, my knight.
Yeah, he's a troublemaker.
Yeah.
What did you get up to this weekend?
Just robot stuff. A lot of chess. I was practicing for you. I know you're pretty good. Ooh, I don't like that. I will take this. Put it over here.
Not cool. Not cool. All right. I will concede. I can see. You got me beat.
Very good game. Well played.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite, positioning companies to meet the next generation of challenges, breaking out of traditional roles.
One of the most important things is looking around the corner.
Look for Chief Future Officer on Bloomberg.
Can you believe it's summer already? That means it's time for the Boston Pops Fireworks Spectacular. And Bloomberg will make sure you see all the fireworks, music, and special appearances by pop superstars and Vogue, chart-topping country duo Low Cash, and film, TV, and Broadway powerhouse Mandy Gonzalez. Plus the U.S. Army Field Band and the cast of the Broadway musical Ragtime. It all starts July 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
In the ensuing years, Sasha's restless curiosity would lead him to projects on subjects as varied as Wu-Tang Clan, the LA riots, and Louis Armstrong, all told with his singular understanding of culture and race and their impact on history. Sasha would also see the successful completion of a deeply personal passion project, the theatrical release of Cane River, his father's feature opus, which was lost to time in the aftermath of his unexpected death in the early 80s.
To me, your piece de resistance at Mass Appeal is Of Mice and Men, which is a tremendous achievement in filmmaking on any and every level, but particularly if you know the intricacies of how Wu-Tang works. How did you manage to wrangle that situation and also to produce such a magnificent product at the end of the day?
Well, my agent called Mass Appeal. He was working with RZA, and he was like, they're looking for a director. Do you want to throw your hat in the ring? I was like, hell yeah. And I knew RZA a little bit from Beat Down and being in the game. We had many friends in common. This guy Mike McDonald, who's a graffiti writer.
And he was their original manager, right?
Yeah. When you throw names around like Mike McDonald, they know that you know what you're talking about, right? So throw around Mike's name and other people's names, and, you know, had a conversation with RZA, and he said, you know, Ron Howard wants to do this film, right? And I said, look, I love Ron Howard, he's great, but he ain't gonna do what I'm gonna do. It's just not possible. You know, I'm of this shit. I was there. When Mike McDonald was promoting Protect Your Neck, we would go out together promoting Beat Down and Protect Your Neck at record shops. Like, we were hand in hand, going hand to hand with people with product. I'm like, yo, this is in my DNA. The skit on the album where the radio host is like, oh, you want to hear that Wu-Tang again and again? That was at City College. And I went to City College, and I was there when that call came in. I was cutting class when that call came in. So I'm like, yo, dude, I'm your guy for this. Like, I'll kill it. It'll be great. Trust me. So fly back the same day and got the call like RZA says, you're good. Do I ever get creatively blocked? Yes, it happens. And you just need quiet time. Sometimes you just have to be alone with yourself and alone with your ideas. If you try to force your ideas, it's not gonna work. If you have a block, you just have to slow down, reset, chill out, listen to that voice. Once again, the voice in your head is there to help you.
After doing Of Mice and Men, you started working on an incredibly personal project that I think sort of is a full circle moment in your career, which is getting involved in helping to facilitate the release of your father's feature film that he directed, you know, in the, I guess, months or year before he passed.
Right.
How did that happen?
So my dad was mainly a documentary filmmaker, but ultimately he wanted to make feature films. So he raised the money from one of the richest black families in New Orleans, the Rhodes family. They are in the mortuary sciences. They own funeral homes. Anyone black has been buried by the Rhodes family in New Orleans. So they got behind the film. Before he died, he was close to getting distribution for it. Richard Pryor really wanted to help get it out there, but the patriarch of the Rhodes family did not want to lose control, so he kind of vetoed it. Then my dad died, and then we go to the funeral, and people are like, we're gonna pay for your college, and the film is gonna do, and then like, nothing happened for years. So, I don't know, 6 years ago, I Googled my dad randomly, and I find an article in the Times about a place called Indie Collect, and they're an organization that works with orphan films that are just out there and no one knows much about them. And this place, Do Art, where they process all the film, had storage of all these films, and they were getting rid of it. They were shutting that floor down. They need to get rid of all these films. And so the Indie Collect people stumbled upon my dad's film, Cane River, and it was in the article. I reached out to Indie Collect and say, I'm the son of Horace Jenkins III, and I'm a filmmaker. Like, let's connect. So I met with them, and they did a great job in sort of getting it to where it was. And I said, we've got to look at distribution. They recommended folks, and then Adam Yauch's company, Oscilloscope, was interested. And when I heard that, I mean, Adam Yauch I considered him a friend. I knew him, and obviously he passed away, but the fact that they were interested in distributing my dad's film, I was like, this is coming from the great beyond. And so the film came out like 2 weeks before COVID. It was released in theaters, and then COVID hit. So if it would have come 2 weeks later, it wouldn't have had its theatrical debut. So my dad's film finally made it to theaters.
That's amazing.
So, and now it's on the Criterion Channel, and it's out there, so people dig it. For me, every shot matters. Like, who knows how much longer I'll be getting these shots. And the shots have been getting better and better, and I'm thankful, but like, I operate under the understanding of like, tomorrow's not promised, opportunity's not promised, so every opportunity I have to try to maximize.
After doing that, during COVID, I know you started working on the Louis Armstrong documentary that came out this spring.
Yep.
How did his story land on your radar, and how did you wrap your head around, pursuing this project?
The nice people at Imagine Entertainment reached out to me about it, and I was honest. I was like, of course I know what everyone else knows, but I'm not super deep into Louis Armstrong. They're like, well, we did 2 years of research, check all this stuff out. And when I saw the research, and when I learned about the tapes that he made at his house, like just talking shit, Louis Armstrong, that motherfucker was hip-hop, like a motherfucker. You hear him talk. Like, you have this squeaky clean image of, like, Louis Armstrong being this classy guy. And not that he wasn't classy, but, like, he's a regular motherfucker who, like, talked that shit. And the guy has a very powerful presence. I mean, his house in Queens is a museum. It's as he left it. I mean, obviously, it's taken some things out, but his wife's nightgown is still on the bed. I mean, it's just, like, insane. And there's this room that was his favorite room. And that room was where he had his reel-to-reels and where he listened to music. And so they know the last song that he listened to before he died, and they had the actual record, and we had the actual turntable. So we shot the reel-to-reels moving, right? They fixed them to get them to work. So we're like, all right, we're gonna plug in the turntable and get the thing to work. And so we plugged in the turntable, it wouldn't work. Kept trying, it wouldn't work. They unplugged it, they spun it, the record started playing. There's 7 or 8 people who were in the room with me. It's like, no bullshit. Like, the guy is real and present. And I was like, okay, this guy, I feel like he approves of what's going on. I'm just gonna roll with it.
That's crazy.
It happened with Biz Markie. So I've just finished a Biz Markie film. And we're in Red Hook, Brooklyn at the sound stage, scouting the sound stage. I was talking about making a Biz Markie cereal, like a cereal box or like, for the set, like, Biz Markie with a gold chain or whatever. Someone taps me on my shoulder, like, look over there. There's a homeless man with his shirt off with a gold chain. Fat dookie rope. Like, when do you ever see homeless people with gold chains? These things come from, like, elsewhere, and I just roll with it.
With both those projects, you're dealing with a protagonist who is no longer with us. And obviously, in both instances, there's a, depth of archival footage. But as a filmmaker, how does that change your approach to the storytelling and crafting the narrative?
Thankfully, in the case of Rick James and Armstrong and Biz, there's a wealth of, like, they're in their own word stuff out there, right? And so once you get familiar with their in their own word stuff, you start to paint a picture of who you think they are. And once you have that picture, based on what seems to sync up with what you believe, based on what you hear, then it becomes much easier to sort of craft something that feels like them. You talk to people who knew him, you talk to people who you don't expect. It's always the unexpected. And so when you interview Rakim, you go back to his high school, and he tells you, I met him in this lunchroom, and he just, everyone tells the story about how they met Biz in their lunchrooms, but he didn't go to their school. That was his hustle, lunchrooms, right? So you learn this stuff, and you're with Rakim at his old high school, and he's sitting there, and you ask him that question, as an interviewer. So where were you when you heard he passed away? And he just like starts wailing, right? Like, he says, right here is where I went. And I just got chills. Like, and he's not like, cut off the cameras and not. He was having like a vulnerable moment, like, because he was in his pain. I was like, I had the idea to go back to the high school, but I had no idea that it was going to be this. And like, when do you ever see men, but black men in general, crying on camera? it's those moments that make you feel like you're connecting with people in ways that like have value.
What are the qualities about yourself that you hold on to the most tightly?
I think it's most important to hold on to who you are. Honestly, I didn't figure out who I was until a couple of years ago, and it feels good to really understand and fully realize who you are. That's powerful, but it takes a while. And so for me, holding on to who you are and understanding who you are, or going on that mission to figure out who you are is the most important thing.
I know that recently you decided to step down from Mass Appeal as an active participant, obviously remain a partner and invested in their continued success and growth. What animated that decision?
A real desire to focus on directing and doing something that's a little bit more boutique and not, 40 employees and all that goes with that. I feel like I'm in a stride now with my directing where I'm getting these opportunities, and you're not gonna be here forever. I'm getting into my twilight years and like the filmmaking is evolving, it's getting better, right? So while I have this opportunity to focus on that, I want to do that. I think with Resurgent Pictures, which is myself, and Markel Cepeda, who's my wife, who's a filmmaker, I think that stuff that we want to do is a little bit more broad. I got to tell the Wu-Tang story. I got to tell the Biz Markie story. I did a film about people who write lyrics, like the new generation of kids or people can tell those stories. But I also feel like hip-hop is a marker in time. I don't believe, especially with black music, there are no genres. Jazz. Louis Armstrong caught a gun charge at 14. RZA's mother ran numbers. So did Rick James' mother. It's the same story over and over again. It's a reflection of and reaction to the environment. Hip-hop and jazz and blues, it's the same shit. It's the same people going through the same shit with the same result. So with that sort of mindset, it's how I approach these films. Having the privilege to make films about black artists from different generations, not many people have had that privilege, but I realize that access to information has led me to understand what I believe today is no genres. It's like, it's the same story over and over again.
One of the ones we're working on at the moment is how do we charge back into Ukraine as soon as the European authorities say it's safe to fly in Ukraine again. Now, nobody knows when that is going to be. But we were Ukraine's second largest airline when the Russians invaded on the 24th of February last year. We would be Ukraine's biggest airline the week after they tell us it's safe to go back in there, because we're going to charge back in there. Initially, we have a plan to open up about 30 routes from 4 Ukrainian airports back into the European Union. And then we want to, I think within 6 to 12 months, open up 3 or 4 large bases in Ukraine. And we're talking to the Ukrainian authorities about creating an environment cost agreement on which we could lead the charge of air travel into a post-war Ukrainian recovery.